It's another episode of the Next Fix podcast. We've got Mike here with us, my new friend, a fellow man with a comeback story, right? And so that's what we're all about around these parts, my friend. And so I don't know anything, right? other than he's a fellow podcast host, he's also a man, and there is a comeback story, but to my point, I don't know anything about it, man. So I'm super excited to have you here, Mike. Thank you so much for your time. I want to start off with that. And we're going to ask you right off the rip, brother. When did the train come off the tracks? What was the genesis of you?
Oh, he wants to take it right
men?
away. Ryan, thanks for having me. Yeah, what I think's important here is that for most of us, we all have that point. And it's important to recognize that because it's an opportunity for each and every one of us to jumpstart something new, to jumpstart something fresh. If we're willing, right? Not everybody is. But yeah, so my story really started to define itself when my wife and I first moved to South Carolina. Oh my gosh, almost 20 years ago. Our kids were really young at the time, and we had moved to South Carolina from Texas, and I had been in the insurance and financial services, but you can't always take with you, at least you couldn't, what you were doing in a different state and all that stuff. And so I had to start over. And what I had hoped was that I would find a guy that was a sage dude, although I didn't have a name for it at the time. Now I know, what I was looking for. I was looking for a sage guy that would maybe take me under his wing and kind of introduce me to everything going on. Well, I didn't find that. I was hoping I'd find a sage individual in the local market that was maybe getting ready to phase out and wanted to help a young stud like me. And, but I didn't find that. And so what happened was I started taking what I knew and going broad, and I got lost, and I was not happy, just absolutely not happy in my career, my profession. I really wanted to make an impact and help people. And I think a lot of men specifically, you just kind of fall in this category and you're like, well, what do I do? What's my purpose? And we kind of fall into the cracks. And so my wife had been very successful in her career. And she said, Mike, listen, I got this. You figure out what you want to do, stay at home with the kids, be a stay-at-home dad, and figure it out. And so I do and now I didn't really even appreciate it at the time. I hired a coach and I said, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm thinking. And we kind of worked through it all. And interestingly enough, I really looked at what I was saying to my children, who at that time were really 1 and 3. They were really pretty young.
Yeah.
But we would say to them, we never use the term daycare or anything like that. We would always use the term school. And because we wanted to set the tone that education was very important from the get-go. And so what I realized was, I hadn't completed college and it felt like I was being a hypocrite. And I'm like, well, what do I? Yeah.
So you were taking all that on like at such an early age, which I commend you on being at least proactive in your speech to your kids, which I've got a 2-year-old, well, 1.5, 19 months. So anyway, I am at this phase of my life and fatherhood where I'm like, I better watch what I say. And in addition to what I say, what else am I listening to? What is hitting his ears? And so, yeah, I think that's a huge.
Well, you become the role model. I mean, I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about, well, is my kid watching me? Yes, they are 100% watching you. They're watching every move you make and everything that comes out of your mouth. And it may seem innocent when they're young, but that will come back. And I see that now in my kids who are, in college. I have one getting ready to graduate here in a couple of short weeks. I have a 23 and a 20-year-old, and I can look at it now, and in some respects, I see how they were compared to other kids and what's going on in their generation. I see how they were molded and guided, and it made a difference. And so I went back to college. I wanted to finish my degree. Now, I went back and I started volunteering as well. So I was a stay-at-home dad. I'm going to college, and I'm doing a lot of volunteering. I'm getting actively involved in my church and in the community. And what I quickly realized, I really had a sales background predominantly. But what I realized with all my business and my sales skills and everything, that I love nonprofits. I love what they were doing. I love the fact that they were able to impact the community. And I thought, man, God's got me going in that direction. And I really looked around and I thought, what do executive directors of larger nonprofits have that I may not have? And I'm like, well, some of them have master's degrees. So, you've been going for it. You're not getting any yeses in the employment market. So get your master's degree. So on top of everything, I continued doing the volunteering and getting experience in that world and working, in my church on various committees and councils, really gaining valuable experience. And I get my master's degree and I go out into the job market and there's nothing. It's just met with crickets and no's. And I began to internalize that. And so what was happening was I was looking at myself going, I'm not worthy. Nobody wants me, right? The self-talk begins. That little guy that sits on your shoulder and says, hey, you're not worth a shit, and I'm internalizing it. And what's interesting, at a certain point, I remember this like it was yesterday. I remember sitting in my wife and I, the church we attended, we used to go to a contemporary service. And I don't know why this is, but all these churches that have contemporary services, they put them out in the gymnasium and you have to put everything out and pick it up when you're done with the service. It's the funniest thing. But anyway, I remember sitting in the gym, just staring at the gym. We had a 10-year-old gymnasium that they never had got the roof right and there was a leak. And I just remember during the middle of the service, staring over at the wall going, I wonder if we'll ever get this fixed. And then it hit me. I'm not even hearing what's going on anymore. And I went to the pastor, and yes, I was on his call committee too. So when I say I was doing everything I could, but I enjoyed the experience. But I went to him and I said, man, not feeling it. And I need to take a break. And he goes, burnout happens. And, I had started a young men's group in the church. And so that was kind of where I first started really small group stuff. And it was a good experience for the most part. But I took that break and really began to think about what's going on here. And the breaking point for me was my wife and I used to socialize quite a bit and go to events because of her position. She was a senior level position. We used to do a lot of community stuff. And we were at an event and people would meet me and they would talk with me and they would see how I was dressed, how I would come across. And in my mind, because I was raised like a lot of men are, I need to be the breadwinner. My mindset was I should be the CEO or president of a company. But this guy comes up to me, and this is common, right? What's your name? And then what do you do?
Right.
And I could not get the words out of my mouth. I just stood there thinking to myself, I can't tell this guy I'm a stay-at-home dad. I'm like supposed to be president of something, right?
Right.
And my wife actually had to jump in and answer the question. And it was really at that point where I was like, dude, there's a problem here. There is a problem here. And I was really going through a period where I was hungry, really dissecting a lot about leadership and wondering about my faith and not from a negative standpoint. Like I felt like there was something missing in my faith life. And it turns out there was. So what happened was I leave the church and really took some time to dissect, okay, what's going on here? And I decided, Mike, you've got the knowledge, skills, and abilities to do anything. Start your own thing. And I contacted a guy that had been involved in some business consulting. And I said,
when you say thing, like your own business or your own?
Yeah. I decided I'm going to become an entrepreneur, because why put up with, a low paying job, which is essentially what I was, had reduced myself to. Why would I want a low paying job and work for somebody else? Was kind of my mindset. If they don't want me, fine, screw them. I'll go do my own thing. And so I went down that road and I started doing some networking events, and I met a guy at a networking event by the name of Paul Bailey, and Paul and I really became great friends. And we, at our first meeting, we were talking about the networking group that we were both a part of, and we were like, there. It felt like there were a lot of takers versus givers in that group.
Mm.
And so, interestingly enough, Paul and I just kept talking, and we were going to do our own networking group, but we never got it off the ground. We realized that we had that him and I were both looking for more of something in our life. And we thought it tied into faith and getting closer to Christ. And so we decided, let's start a men's small group. And we just continued down that path. We found somebody to mentor us and really walk us through what is this small group thing. And he connected us with a group in Charlotte, in North Carolina. And Paul and I ultimately end up, this is about 6.5 years ago, at a men's retreat. Now, I've never been to a men's retreat in my life. And here's where a major shift occurs in my life. I had been putting in the work. I'm digging into my faith. I'm curious as heck about it and want to grow, but I'm not quite yet where I want to be. So I go to the retreat, and the camp director gets up, and it was on a Saturday morning, and he said, we're going to play 3 worship songs this morning, and I want you to hear these songs as God's singing them to you. And the first song was a song by Josh Groban called You Are Loved. Never heard that song. I'd heard various Josh Groban songs. It's not a worship song. It was just the words and the moment and the work that was being done that weekend. And when I heard that song start to go, I just darn near hit the ground, and I heard God say, I want an intimate relationship with you. You're my beloved son. And I mean, the tears were just coming into my eyes. And I remember looking around the room going, am I the only one here? Is this happening to anybody else? And if it is happening to somebody else, where do these guys go? Who do they talk to? And the seeds had long been planted to maybe start a coaching thing or work with men, but that was the moment. In that moment, I'm like, how do I transition this? And I began to try to unpack what had gone on. And it took me several months. And then, our men's small group in South Carolina was called True Man. That's where all the True Man stuff comes into play for me. And True Man was Jesus Christ walk on earth as a true man. And so our thing with it was we want the role model, and he is the ultimate role model. We know we can't get there because he was perfect, and we're not perfect, but he lays out the groundwork for us to follow. And so as a business, I just brought that along, the True Man Life Coaching, the True Man podcast, and in the book that I do. But really the evolution for me, and I'd been a Christian all my life, I didn't understand this whole idea of intimacy with God, closeness with God, and what it would do for my life. And in fact, what I realized I had tried to do a majority of my life was control everything. And ultimately, I was white-knuckling my way through life, trying to control everything from A to Z. And when I found that intimacy and I began to submit to my life to God in a much deeper way and begin to study it, everything shifted. And everything that has happened to me over the last 6.5 years, I can trace back to that moment when he came to me at a retreat and said, I want that relationship, because I was ready for it.
If somebody walks up to you now and they say, what do you do? What do you say?
Well, it depends on the moment, but ultimately what I do is I help impact the lives of, and it's easy for me to say men, but because I have a couple of different businesses now, I can say many. My goal is to help people, to guide them, to help them get what they want in life. And that sounds really simplistic, but I'm sure you've experienced this. I'm sure you see this. So many people do not have a purpose. They don't have goals. They don't have a direction to go in. And it's not that they don't, want to take the time. Many people don't know. We don't teach these things. It's not like you show up in grade school, high school, or college and somebody goes, well, here's how you set a goal, and many people read a book on this stuff, but they don't know how to apply it. And I think The best experiences that I've had in life, and I grew up playing sports, so this has always been a part of me. I've always pointed towards my teachers, my coaches, the mentors that I've had in my life. Sometimes you need somebody to just walk alongside you where you're at and help you. And by help, I mean that may be nothing more than listening. I do believe that we all have the answers deep inside of us. As a mentor, it's my responsibility if I'm walking alongside you to ask really deep questions so that you can think through where you're at and where you want to go. But if you don't have goals and purpose in your life, you're just meandering along.
Sure. And the purpose had struck for you when you heard God intimately communicating to
Yeah.
you that you're his son. And I love that you had posed the question just after that, like, are you the only one here? And so I find in my own experience that when I've had those moments with God and I feel like the message, whether it be in scripture, whether I'm reading it, hearing it, listening to it, whatever it may
Yeah.
be, when it is dialed in and in tune to me, that's when it's the most intense, but it's also when I can be sure that it's God talking, speaking. Because there's a lot of times it's like, especially earlier in my faith, I'd wonder, like, what is that? Is that just really good marketing on Instagram, or is this God talking to me? Right? Like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
How much of the noise that happens in the world is like is meant to be on a divine level? And so,
Well, all of it, right? But
sure,
here's the challenge. Here is the challenge. There's no question, Ryan, that this is the challenge. Whose voice are you tuning into? Have you misinterpreted your life? The chances are pretty high. Have you misinterpreted the voices in your life? And here's what I mean by that. You got light and you got darkness. You got God and the devil. And here's the reality of the world. Every morning when you get out of bed and step foot on the ground, evil is trying to take you out. Nah, hit the snooze button. Nah, I don't feel like getting up this morning. Those voices start churning in your head. What ability do you have to turn them out? God doesn't want you laying in bed. God wants you. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself here. God wants me down exercising first thing in the morning. God wants me in my worship and prayer and meditation in the morning. God wants these things for me because God wants me to be the very best, and He's there to help me be the very best. The negative thoughts that I'm hearing, those are coming from the devil. Why? He's trying to take me out. As a man, he's trying to take me out because he doesn't want me to be a good father. He's trying to take me out because he doesn't want me to be a good husband. It's important to note that if the devil can stick his head in there and get you going down the wrong path and take out the head of the family, he knows he can take the family out. And hence we've got a country where, the family unit, the leave it to beaver era is gone. And my question always is, what was wrong with it? What was really wrong with the family unit? I know some feminists out there is going to go, well, Mike, that's crazy. The wife stays at home. And I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that the American family unit has come under attack. Men and our masculinity has come under attack. I mean, if you walk up to a door right now and a woman's walking up to the door, do you ever ask yourself, gosh, should I open this door or is she going to be offended? What a ridiculous question. At one point I decided, I'm like, I'm no longer going to comment about a woman's outfit or your hair looks wonderful today. Why? I didn't want to see myself on the news, and that's ridiculous. And I think we've gotten away from basic, principles of our American foundation.
I heard something recently that actually made quite a bit of sense. A bit of a side note here. That original family structure, the Leave It to Beaver structure specifically, through the empowerment of women, really what it did is it increased it doubled the amount of workers or labor
Yeah.
available, and it drove wages down, and then it made it impossible to not survive unless both parents are working. And so, that kind of
Yeah.
made sense from the economic side of my brain. However, that it's not really touching too much on the social aspect of it.
Well, you are right from the economic perspective. Now, I do want to point out here because it's easy for I know it's easy for somebody to come at me and go, well, you work with men, you da. Listen, my wife was in the C-suite. My wife has been at senior levels of organizations. I have received a phone call that went something like this: Mike, I need you to go get the kids because I can't tell all the guys in this meeting. I need to go get them because then I look like the mommy. I know what it takes for a woman to survive in a man's world. I know what it takes for a woman to get and the sacrifices she has to make to get to the C-suite. I look at it this way. So, and I appreciate that. So I don't want somebody to come at me and go, well, gosh, she's against women. No, not at all. Our economy shakes out. There are very few people that can survive in this world without a 2-income family. I don't know that any of us are happy about it, especially right now in this economy. But I, what I do believe is this: your children need a man as equally as they need the woman, the mother, the father. It's a team unit. You're working together. It's an equal balance. What does that look like? Well, that's going to be different for each family. What I do know is that as men, I believe we need to come together. We need to talk more about these situations. How can I treat if I'm working 50 hours a week, how can I be a better father? How can I be, if you're a stay-at-home dad, how can you, how can you help your wife, And so I think all of these things are, it's important to have these discussions because the American family falls apart, or a family falls apart because guys don't know how to have these discussions. Many of us were not raised to have these discussions. We don't even know what they look like.
Sure. And then kind of go back to your story.
Yeah.
First, I've been dying to know, did you ever fix that leak in the roof? Like, that was a really big deal. Like, you had
Yeah, it's funny. I'm sure they probably got to it, but
right,
I wasn't there to help them solve
right,
that
right.
problem.
But
Yeah.
but more importantly, like, you were in a position where your wife was the breadwinner
Yeah.
and you were a stay-at-home dad. I
Yeah.
did that very briefly. It did not pan out, man. It's not the best use of my resources. It was more of a catastrophe when I tried to run, captain the ship from
Yeah.
home, but I digress. So when you were at that point of your life and you were given a question, what do you do? And your wife steps in. I suppose being a man, how much of what you do now is driven by that possible, or well, I mean, I don't even want to say possible.
That's
There's
a
emasculation going. You're being emasculated, and like,
yeah.
do you feel like you found a solution for that element?
100%. Here's the
Yeah,
thing. As men, this is the typical scenario, right? You meet somebody. What's your name? What do you do? I mean, and it's almost a race to see how fast they can get it out. Like after they get to your name, what do you do? And so for many of us, our identity becomes tied to our career path. And for me, I was making assumptions that people even cared, and so I thought, it mattered to me. And so I had tied my identity to my career or what I thought I was supposed to be. And I didn't have, at that point when that event occurred, I did not have that close relationship with God. And so I was tying my life to my career and what I did. I wasn't tying it to whose I was, which was a beloved son of God. Now, when I began to dig deeper into that relationship, began to study not just the Bible and God, but myself. Because the reality of the situation is if you're going to be your best, you're going to have to go look in a mirror. It's unavoidable. You will not like what you see in that mirror most of the time. But your job is, if you choose to accept it, is to try to get better. And I'd always had these images in my head of being the best, being on stage, being in front of an audience, being the leader. And I knew I had the capability. So my job was to figure out how to do that given the deck of cards that I'd been presented. And so it was about really overcoming this, negative thoughts that I had put into my head or I had allowed others to put in my head and really overcome negativity. And, you know, so it was about a comeback. It was about overcoming. And, life is that way. Life is going to throw us giant turd balls at all the time. And so, um, that you get around positive people that can help you and givers versus takers.
Now, you mentioned negativity. Would you would you claim that to be the biggest culprit in,
It's
your
one of them. I mean,
one of
our
them?
self-talk is for most people, our self-talk is defeating us. Now, we also live in a culture where sometimes we're defeating ourselves and we don't even realize it. So perfect example, if you're watching this on camera, I'm holding up my mobile phone right now, which is yes, there are good things that can be done with your mobile phone. It's also one of the most evil culprits in our culture right now because people say, well, I don't have time to work out for 30 minutes a day. How much time do you spend on Facebook? 30 minutes. Well, and what are you looking at on social media? You're looking at negativity. If you watch the news, you're watching negativity. What sells on the news? The negative news. Sex sells. That's, as we all know this, sex sells. Most men, if I look at the statistics, nearly all men are, at one point or another have been affected by pornography. Highly negative. So there are a lot of negative images and pictures, video that are out there that we get ourselves roped into. And not to mention the people that you have in your life that may not be the best role models. And so, you have to recognize that and you have to eliminate it as much as you possibly can. Mindset is everything. The human mind, you can overcome anything that you want to overcome if you set your mind to it. It is a choice, is it not, Ryan?
Yeah. Yeah, I touch on this often because fear and faith, they both require you to believe in something that you cannot see. And we get a choice on which one we want to manifest, right? And so Einstein, and I say this because I'm never quite certain, right? Because people say, "Oh, Einstein said this," but either way, the biggest decision in any person's life will be whether or not they live in a benevolent or malicious universe. And if you were to dissect that decision, or if you were to look at the different parts of it, he's saying the universe, right? So he's saying everything that's going on around you, your very large scale environment. Is it malicious or is it benevolent? And when you decide that it is malicious and that the universe is going against you, you're screwed. Because then that lens is what you'll use for every single thing that you encounter. However, you can also decide if you believe in a God that loves you and you choose that to be your universe, meaning your large scale environment, and you believe that it's working in your favor and it's benevolent and for your best interest, all of a sudden everything is through that lens. And then everything that comes at you
Yeah.
can be looked upon with that magnificent lens of it's working for you and not against you. And so that decision is massive. So any way you really word it and or exchange the phrase, the choice that we get is imperative for where we end up. And it's just as simple as that. And it can be on a very large scale, can be very on a very small scale. It's like, did you get the flat tire because the world and universe and God is evil? Or was it meant to slow you down and prevent you from getting into an accident at the next stoplight? We get that choice. And that sounds ridiculous to some people. But if people were to try it, and just assume it's a benevolent universe and it's a loving God, then you can just see what changes around you pretty fast.
Yeah, and you mentioned fear, and I think that's important. So I've been working on keynote address, really looking to get into more speaking. And one of the things that I found that held me back was not asking for help. I would try to do everything on my own. So the name of the keynote is actually the power of asking for help, which is part of my journey that began when I was really young. And again, anybody watching this video can see clearly that I'm wearing glasses. I've had stigmatism most of my life. But when I was 6 years old, I went to the eye doctor, and my teacher noticed I was a little cross-eyed, and that, diagnosed the stigmatism. So the funny story, well, it's funny now.
You're right.
The funny story is the doctor gave me an eye test and said, "What do you see?" And I said, "Well, I see the moon jumping over the cow." And he laughed and went, "No, the cow's jumping over the moon. We got a problem here. And so he put me in glasses. And in 1976, that wasn't really all that common. And the other challenge that I had was I was a little introverted. And so now all of a sudden you start to pull back, right? And I did that. I pulled back. And when you pull back, you stop asking questions. And then the other thing that really hit me, other than the 4-eye jokes, was adults would come to me and say, "Man, those glasses make you look smart," right? That whole stereotype around that. And now I got a real problem. If you're wearing glasses and you look smart and you're introverted, you can't raise your hand and ask a question, because that means you don't know the answer. And so I just flat out stopped raising my hand and asking for help. And that works until it doesn't. And typically it shows up in your adult life. And that's definitely where it showed up for me. I thought that I was just going to be able to handle everything on my own. And men specifically we have got this one mastered, how to work, on our own, and try to maneuver around in secret sometimes and wear a mask, and that whole fake it till you make it mentality. And it just does not work. And so, one of the things that I talk about in the power of asking for help is I touch on the things that can hold you back. And I get into some of the fears like you're talking about. And I talk about the fear of rejection that sometimes prevents us from asking for help, and the fear of uncertainty. Well, like, what's going to happen if I ask for help? And vulnerability, man, I'll tell you, and I bet you could speak forever on this, Ryan. When we drop that mask, that fake persona, and we become authentic, it's like a weight lifted off our shoulder. But yet so many of us men will walk around trying to be something that we aren't. And of course, the final fear I like to talk about is this idea of being unworthy, this unworthiness that we go through of, man, I just don't feel, worthy. Fears hold us back. They will just hold us back and keep us stuck. And, so, and men, if I had a piece of advice, well, since I have the microphone, I'll give you the advice. Ask for help. I do a lot of coaching and mentoring, but I've also had a lot of coaches and mentors. I've had faith-based coaches. I had a golf coach. I had a podcast coach. I had some, hired me for that. I have a speech coach. I will hire a coach and a mentor for everything. Why? It's important for people to have eyes on things that I'm doing, not because I want to feel, belittled or embarrassed. No, not at all. I want to be the best. When I hired my speech coach, who's an unbelievable dude, and we're having so much fun pulling all this together, I went to him and I said, and I feel like this is at the point where I'm at in my life. I said, Scott, I could go out and roll this out right now. It's just going to be mediocre. I don't do anything mediocre. I don't want to do that. I want to be the best. I want to work with the best. I want to deliver the best. I want, best, best, best. And what I would tell every man that hears this or every person that hears this, you're worthy. You're worthy of being the best, and you can do it. You can absolutely set your mind to it and do it. And in fact, I bet, Ryan, you feel the same way. We want you to do it.
Right.
We want you to do it. Unfortunately, I've had to learn that I can't want it worse than you do.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it's very rare that somebody a little ahead of you in any arena is going to be casting stones at you. And so it can be assumed that if somebody is, it's because of their own particular circumstances.
Yeah.
That goes for that element of it, right? If people are afraid of, asking for help, almost anybody that's ahead of you is going to be willing to do it. It's just kind of the nature of it.
Especially when you're locked in there with the right people.
Sure. Sure.
There isn't anybody that I have in my life right now that if at any given moment I ask them for something, wouldn't be willing to help. Now, I had to eliminate a few people in order to be able to say that. But that being said, if you don't have the type of people in your life that are willing to help, you probably need to eliminate that person.
Sure.
They're
Sure.
dragging you down.
So if working with men, right, coaching men, true men, coaching, what would you say is the either biggest or most common challenge that you run up against with these guys on their behalf? Like, what are they saying? Hey, this is my issue.
One of the interesting things I've seen is there are many, but this is a biggie, I think. It doesn't matter what happened to you. I mean, it matters to you. You could have had a lot of guys have a story from when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. The devil likes to strike when you're young because that's where he can take you out. And so it's amazing to me how many guys have a story when they were 7, 8, 9, 10 years old where they got off track. And it's a wide range of things. But what happens is we bury that stuff and we hope we never have to deal with it. We just stick it down deep in our soul and we're like, man, I'm never going to touch that. And then we become adults and we start entering into relationships. And the relationship wants to know you. But if you have stuff buried that you've never dealt with, it's funny how when we get in, and I don't know why there's this magic age. It's like hit for me. And then you get in your 30s and you have a couple of kids and you're married and you're like going, is there more to life than this? Like, what's going on here? And that stuff that happened to you starts to bubble up and surface. And it always comes up for whatever reason in our relationships with our wife or our relationship with our kids. And so when we bury that stuff, it's important to go back and to heal from those wounds. Those things that have really held us back, maybe more than we think. It could be a father wound. It could be a mother wound. It could be something else happened in your life. But it's important that we heal from those wounds, that we take a good hard look at them, and I've spent a lot of time doing that. Why did I go down this path versus this path? And really digesting, what did that mean? And now how do I use that to my advantage? A lot of people sometimes will say, shadow work or whatever, what's your shadow? How do I use that to my advantage versus my, it's causing me to be stuck and holding me back. And so I think what I encourage, and it's not unusual for me to be in a men's event where stuff starts coming out and then some other guy goes, you too? Right? Your story is unique to you and it's critically important. But I can guarantee you this. If you're at a small men's event or you're at a men's event, the guy to the right of you or the guy to the left of you he's got a story too. And I'm willing to bet it's probably not too far off from what happened to you. And that's important because we really, women do great community stuff. Like they're in community all the time, right? And they love being in community. Guys will just like, no, I got this. I got this. You
Right.
don't. You don't. You don't. And that's why I love small group. That's why I love guys coming together and forming groups and really talking about, how can I be better? I personally, and you heard me use the term sage earlier, I love seeking the guidance of older men, people mature, maybe I should use the term mature men that have been down the road so that I can go to them and get that guidance. Now, what's funny about that, Ryan, is, I'm 55, soon to be 56. And what I'm realizing is I've had a lot of younger guys coming out of the woodwork and they're coming to me and I'm like, well, that's not my target audience. What's going on here? What I'm realizing is I'm a sage guy to them.
Mm.
And many of these young fellas have not had the guidance in their life. They've not had a father present. They maybe have been a family that has gone through divorce. They've lived through an era where their government has lied to them. Their colleges and universities have lied to them. Their high schools have lied to them. Do you know that Z's and this younger generation now are going to church at the highest rate of any generation? They're buying Bibles, the highest rate of any age bracket. These people are hungry right now and running around going, oh, they're such a lazy generation. That's crap. That is crap. And as guys like me, I keep encouraging, hey, go to these people. Go to these people. Watch and observe what's going on. When Charlie Kirk was murdered, all of a sudden, it should be blatantly obvious to you that you got a hungry generation. And again, this goes back to fatherhood. They're watching you. And I will tell you this, the young people don't like what they're seeing. I don't care on the right side or the left side. Take your pick. You're acting like morons. Grow up. Grow up. And because our young people are watching and they're coming. They're coming. And they're coming after you. You can call them lazy if you want. Oh, hey, grew up with a cell phone in their hand. You know what? A lot of these people, they're ready to come. And they're going to take over very shortly. And it's coming sooner than you'd think.
Right.
What's going
Right.
on in this country? And they might doggone get it right.
God willing. Yeah. I'm rooting for them. I'm rooting for them. And this is it's an interesting time. And so I can't wait to see the adventure that my own son will be on as a man. But
Yeah.
speaking of men, what actually, because there's the True Man podcast, there's a True Man coaching. You've mentioned some groups. I guess, what is it that you are, boots on the ground,
Yeah.
age man, right? What do you have? What have you developed? What have you got going on?
So
That's
it's a
meaningful?
good question. It's interesting. I'm gonna hold this up. So if you're seeing this on video, you can see it. This is my book I put out earlier this year, True Man, True Ways, a roadmap of discovery to the masculine heart. And that's something I took a lot of time to work on. And we put it out. We actually thought about delaying it for the very reason that I'm about to talk about. But the reason I wanted to get that out was I often say I help guys get out of their head and into their heart. And that is critically important that you find your head. Men, we are fixers. We like to fix things, but that's not always useful. And until you touch base with your heart and become the authentic you that you're capable of, you're going to have a hard go of it. And so I wanted to put some very basic fundamentals into that book. And what I did was I checked in with scripture. If, I'm talking about goal setting, what does the Bible have to say about goal setting? What does the Bible have to say about taking care of our bodies? What does the Bible have to say about taking care of money? And I put it in that book. Now, here's the funny part. The book comes out and I'm realizing you've been wanting to go to stage all your life. And I pulled out this whole idea of the power of asking for help. It was something I had worked on a couple of years ago, and I would periodically bring it up and everybody'd be like, oh, I want to hear about that. So the funny thing, Ryan, is now everybody goes, where's that at in the book? And I'm like, well, it's not in the book, which means I got to write another one. But so the book's out there, and I think it's a great foundational piece for, and there's worksheets you can download that go with that. And I think it's a great foundational piece for guys that maybe don't have the closest relationship with Christ and they've heard all these things, but they're like, well, what does the Bible have to say about all that? And so that's there. And then I really do feel the most important piece that I'm working on right now is my talk on the power of asking for help. And we've been preparing for this and we're getting ready to really work on a men's summit that we're going to put out there. But the whole idea of the talk really is to get out there in front of men's groups, organizations, even businesses that are Christian organizations, and talk about how we can come together in our groups and work together as men to better ourselves. You know, really working on a number of things around this and the potential of helping to form those small groups and maybe even running it through the true man community. And we'll see how that all goes. But the speaking really leads towards, you know, workshops and those types of things where we can get out and talk with men and really talk about this. In fact, the men's summit we're working on will be called the American Family Renaissance. And that's why you heard me talking about family earlier, because we want men to understand that, you know, you are the leader of your family. Your children are observing you. They're watching you. They're following your every move that you do. I always laugh every year. They have about this time of year that we're recording this in December down in your neck of the woods in Florida, they have the PNC golf challenge. And so it used to be a father-son golf event. Now they've Annika Sorensen does it every year with her son. But the one thing that is always fascinating to me about that event, and I love to watch it for a number of reasons, not the least of which is I love golf, but is how on the golf course, the son's, how he will stand or his golf swing or whatever will mirror his father's.
Hmm.
Almost every time. It is stunning. Or the look on their face. And, you know, it's just amazing to me, or how they even talk. And so that's one of the big reasons why I love watching that.
Right.
But that's the importance here. You're role modeling even when you don't know it. And so your kids are going to respond the very same way that you do. And if you don't like the way you're responding to things, or maybe I should say the way you're reacting to things, you need to learn how to respond better. And so, you know, you're role modeling, and your wife, she wants you to be the very best man you can be. And so these are the things that I'm getting out and talking about and working on. And
Yeah.
I have another side business too, man. I'm going full board 24 hours a day,
So
but
it's funny you mentioned that because I've recently I got in touch with my father, which we have no relationship. However, you know, you're talking about the mirroring, you know, through observation. And then
yeah,
I've even seen that there's a good amount of mirroring when the observation isn't even there.
right.
Right, and it's wild because him and I are like, wow, there's a lot of similarities here in our journeys in addiction and our recovery, our sobriety, and there's, just many, many similarities, and it is peculiar to see, you know, lineage, right? And so I think that's very it's a very, keen observation, right? And watching a golf swing, it's very 'cause you're seeing one go and then the next,
Yeah.
but
You
that's a
know,
good
and
film.
Ryan, I'll say this about you, man. I applaud you. And, you know, you've taken action on yourself to overcome a very serious addiction. Now, you know, I'm gonna say this, and I'm not downplaying anything. We're really all addicted to something, you know, to one degree or another. And, you know, I think it's important that we acknowledge that. But, you know, I also think it's critically important, and I'll say this as men, as dads, as fathers, that we break that cycle. We've got to break that cycle because, I mean, would you want your kid to go through the same thing that you went through? I don't
Yeah,
think anybody wants that.
it's a big deal. And it's a big deal. And I've thought about that many times so far, and I will continue to think about that on how to best approach that.
Yeah.
But I think that as all men, and especially all men that are fathers, because I feel like that element for myself is fascinating and so important. And whether that is a relationship with our Father in heaven, or if it's a relationship with our Father here, or the relationship that we are fathers for our sons, whatever, or our daughters, whatever it is, that's an important part. I mean, it's
Yeah.
if not the most important part. Many people will argue that our lineage, right, carrying on humans. And I think that people like yourself who are paying attention to the message that we are bequeathing to the next generation, it's important to pay attention to that stuff. And so, man, that's you've got a lot of stuff going on, man. I really commend you on the speaking, having that knack or having that natural gift, and not be crippled by fear. Because hey, that's a major one, right? Like that's a very common to speak in front of people. It's a very common fear that all people kind of like. Like,
Well,
because even if you truly enjoy it,
yeah,
you
and
get the butterflies. You're like,
let's be clear here. Is there some degree of fear? Sure. You know what? The nervousness means you care. The nervousness means you care. But I also have an extreme passion for this, because when God came to me and said, I want a relationship with you, what that taught me was in real time was because I had a desire for that. I wanted that too. I didn't know. I didn't know it was available. And by the way, there are a lot of men out there that don't have a great relationship with their father, and they want it. Now, they may or may not get it, but I think it's important to understand here when we're talking about fathering, we all have a desire to be seen, to be heard. There is nothing better than hearing from your dad, I love you. I'm proud of you. I appreciate you. Or to get that hug. I can still get that because, my father, who just turned 84, and I can't believe that, is my biggest fan too. Doing a podcast has gifted us a different relationship because he listens and he wants to talk about it. It's amazing to me what it's done. But if we can't get that relationship with our natural father, it's important that we have it with our godly father. And then, are there other groups of men that we can go to help fill the void?
sure. And I think that's what you're doing. And that's
Yeah.
amazing. And you're doing it through the True Man podcast, True Man coaching. And so you're coming at it from all angles. And I suppose
It
that
didn't
could be an
start out that
advantage.
way. It just kind of, that's what happens when you stick with this. That's the other message here, Ryan, is that we live in a culture where things appear like they go viral or happen overnight. No, there's a reason the Bible spends so much time talking about perseverance, because it's a real thing. Patience and perseverance are a real thing. And when I started this whole thing, I have no idea why I was like, man, this is going to be a huge, long marathon. And I'm okay with that. And, I'm to the point now where I've really matured into this and I'm feeling it and I'm understanding the message and I'm getting it to the point where I really want it to be. Now, that takes time. Most people quit.
Well, I'm glad that you're not, brother. And so I'm going to have all that stuff. I'll have everything in black and white so people can come check you out, man, and then maybe get involved in one of these groups or come see you on stage. But yeah, it's been a true blessing. Mike, I really appreciate your time. And you got one little nugget before our people, before we call it a day.
One little nugget. Just, I would just encourage everybody, just go look in the mirror and ask yourself, do you like what you see? And if you don't like what you see, what are you going to do to change it?
That's a pretty damn good challenge, brother. Well, this has been another episode of The Next Fix. Thank you, Mike. We'll see you on the next one.
God bless.